thanks so much. We're really grateful for this opportunity, for this award. It's very nice to win this and to have the opportunity to explain what we've done in this article. Do you want to maybe remind our listeners and viewers of what was actually the starting point of the whole journey?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. So, historically, controlling trade routes has been really key strategically, and maybe even more specifically controlling waterways. Even nowadays, it remains something that's absolutely central, and we could be even worried that it will be more important in the future, as in recent history, globalization is booming. And in addition to this observation, we know that, at least it's widely often accused that globalization is also a source of many issues we see today. Pollution, even conflict. You have an article explaining how the Rwandan genocide was a direct consequence of globalization. In light of this, you can really think if this fight to control strategic position might increase and be more important in the future. However, in 2019, we were already working on this. And at the time, French and Dutch battleships were sent in the Strait of Hormuz to protect trade, to act as potentially a peacekeeping force. And hence, a puzzle emerges, right? That was exactly what we were discussing and thinking about. Could it be that actually globalization, often accused of all ills, acts actually as a pacifying forces, making those strategic positions to control waterways safer? And actually, we are answering this question with our paper, theoretically and empirically.
It's true that there was an existing literature, of course. So there have been tons of paper that studied the correlation, if you like, between international trade and international wars, going 200, 300 years back, and showing, for example, that before the two big world wars, trade went down, and so there was this correlation, but it was kind of hard to interpret because it could be due to several things, right? It could be that if relationships become more hostile, well, trade goes down and conflict breaks out, but there's no real link between the two. It's just a spurious correlation. It's not that one causes the other. And so in order to study this in more depth, also looking on civil wars, which are kind of in the last over the last 70 years, the lion's share of conflict have been civil wars. Of course, in the media, international wars rightly get a lot of attention, but if you would just look at the statistics for the last 70 years, it's true that the dominant category of war have been civil wars. And some of them very, very, very bloody. Think of the Second Congo War that killed millions of people. So basically what we wanted to do, we wanted to find a way to really see what's the impact of globalization on civil conflict. And it's a hard question. It's a really hard question to ask because basically, again, everything is what we economists would call endogenous. So all these elements are kind of, they all influence each other. So we need some kind of cornerstone or some handle that we can grab and that's kind of fixed. And so what we came up with methodologically, you will describe in more detail exactly how we create this algorithm. But so what we came up with methodologically was to find a new way to calculate the strategic importance of each point on Earth. And this is kind of in a very kind of algorithm-based way. So of course, New York is important, but if we start looking at New York, well, there may be plenty of reasons why New York was built where New York was built. And so we wanted to have kind of an objective measure that doesn't depend really on human choices. We wanted Mother Nature to determine what counts as strategically relevant, so that our statistics are very clean and purged from all kinds of confounders that could arise. And so we created this index of how strategically important each point on the globe is, and then we looked at trade shocks. And say, well, because these places that are very central for maritime trade are exactly the places where globalization would have the biggest impact. And that's why, combining our new measure of how strategically relevant a point is, together with exploiting these trade shocks arising, we can finally say something about what's really the causal impact of globalization on civil conflict.
We used only geographical features to predict trade and where the ships should go. And basically here, if I go more in depth in the techniques, very simply we looked at between every points of coasts on Earth, what would be the shortest path on oceans and waterways to go from one point to the other. And when aggregating all that, we can see where there is a lot of passage, when there could be like bottlenecks, like Strait of Hormuz, Panama Canal to Gibraltar, because there is not many ways to go from Asia to maybe Western America or something like this. So we did that, and then we have this map, and we compared our map where we used only geographical features to predict trade compared to what we observed in reality. And it was very closely related. So using only geographical features, we could pretty well predict actual trade. What do we find in the end? Well, basically, we were able to measure that indeed those places to control strategic positions, to control waterways, were more at risk, higher risk of conflict. But the point is, and really what we were after, was rather what's the difference for those places, so really comparing a similar place in the world, really granular again, so 55 kilometers squared cells on the global scale. And we look at those places and compare between moment of trade booms with moments, years, where there is a lower trade exchange. And then we found something really striking, and what we were suggesting with our introduction is that during trade booms, those places were actually safer. And we also have behind that a theoretical model that you did to explain and show what would be the logic theoretically to explain how those places and the world would require them to be more safe when trade increases.
So in all of our work in general, the thing that we're really always after is what are the policy lessons? How can we make the world a better place, and how can we learn something that's useful for society? And I think here one of the lessons that we can draw is that there are so big incentives for big powers to make sure that these travel routes are still kind of smoothly protected, that the system kind of takes care of securizing, of making secure these places. However, when there is no globalization boom in normal periods, if you like, or in periods of low trade, well then suddenly nobody feels in charge of making sure that world trade can kind of smoothly go through these areas. And that's exactly when it becomes dangerous. And so then maybe what this means is we should not leave it to the superpower to protect the world, but we need an international organization who takes charge of the responsibility of kind of creating, protecting these strategically important points of human trade. And so maybe it's safer to rely on the UN, for example, or some other international organization to really kind of guarantee, to warrant the smooth world trade, rather than to rely on some superpower who may or may not, depending on the period, be available, right? One could say, maybe it's fair to say that it's a mix of informal business relations between places and formal agreements. Mm-hmm. So it's, the economics and the politics coming together to kind of help make the place safer. Mm-hmm. So it's about incentives and it's about institutions.